And welcome back. I see now there's over 130 of you here. This is exciting to see that group growing and growing. And we're going to go right now, right into our next session, Connected Vehicle Data for Work Zone Metrics. Let me do the pleasure of introducing you to our moderator. Many of you know Beth McNeil Stimson, who serves as ARTBA's Vice President of Education Operations. She spent over 30 years of experience in adult education, instructional design, and project management, building and teaching face-to-face, hybrid, and fully online programs. She's worked at 7 colleges and universities, 2 software companies, and a defense contractor, designing smart classrooms, software, job aids, and instructional materials to support teaching and learning. So a big virtual round of applause for Beth Stimson.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I'm very happy to be here and introduce our 2 panelists for this particular session, Connected Vehicle Data for Work Zone Metrics. Our first speaker is Darcy Bullock. Darcy Bullock is the Lyles Family Professor of Civil Engineering at Purdue University and serves as the Director of the Joint Transportation Research Program, JTRP. Darcy is a registered professional engineer in Indiana and has over 30 years of experience working closely with academia, transportation agencies, and private sector partners in the area of transportation systems and big data analytics. Our second panelist, Skylar, you want to turn your camera on real quick before we get started so people can see you? Thank you. Skylar Knickerbocker is a research engineer at Iowa State University, working primarily in the areas of traffic operations, maintenance, and safety, including data analytics, data visualization, and big data management. So again, thanks for joining us, and we're off with Darcy's presentation.
Okay, so looking at where's my share button? Has that been turned over to me yet?
Yes, absolutely. Just click once into presentation and then advance it, please. Thank you.
You can see my screen now?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm not sure it's advancing. Where's the share button? I don't see it appearing on my screen.
If you open up the GoToWebinar program,
yep.
Can you see it here?
I don't see it where it is. I got audio and I got camera, but I don't have a screen.
Darcy, we are seeing it, so we can just advance that as you tell us where we are. So.
Okay, so I'm just advanced the screen. I don't see it right now. Can you see a program right now?
Right. So we see the connected vehicle data for Work Zone Metrics.
No, you're sharing your screen, not mine.
Yes.
I need my screen to be shared.
Right. Yes. The presentation is being shared from our system. Yes.
Okay, I've got it now. Okay, sorry. So I'm sorry about that. I've now got the lag. The lag is slow, but it's there. Okay, so I'll start out. Thank you for the introduction. Sorry for the hiccup here. I will make sure we stay on time as we go through this. I think Juan just finished a great presentation on speed cameras, and I would say probably a really good example, or speed automated enforcement, a really good example on where we in Indiana have used connected vehicle data. I mean, just yesterday, this is a press release from INDOT, and I will tell you how we used the data in Indiana. We used connected vehicle data to inform us on how the PennDOT system was working. And you know, quite honestly, this slide you see right here, I often call it the GIGO figure. One of my colleagues is on the line, but when we were able to use connected vehicle data and see the impact that PennDOT was having with their automated enforcement, that was an absolute game changer in Indiana on terms of what we saw as the benefit of that technique. And so Juan, great presentation before, and I think one of the things is ARTBA, as you guys have organized this peer exchange is really a good venue to share some of the stories. What I'm going to talk to you a little bit right now on is just give you a quick overview where I'm coming from at the Joint Transportation Research Program, pool fund study that Jawad is involved with, and then go through a couple nice case studies. Those of you who know me and know I'm a big believer in the pool fund study program. This is a picture we had a couple years ago with Ohio on traffic signal space. The most current one that I'm going to talk about today, Jawad, is the FHWA technical liaison. John McGregor at INDOT has been our study champion. And this QR code talks about some of the work that we have done to define how we can use connected vehicle data for work zone metrics. And I often say our agencies know more about our infrastructure than we do. The connected vehicle data is the key to that. Skylar will talk a little bit more about this later. But quite honestly, it's the breadcrumbs that vehicles drop on the interstate virtually. We typically see about 5% of the vehicles in Indiana are connected vehicles. That looks like a snapshot across the whole country. And for those around the country who have not seen this video before, this is the best way I like to explain connected vehicle data. This is a kind of sped up view of a little over an hour and a half of connected vehicle data on I-69 in Indiana in the northeast quadrant of the state. If we look at those dots, those virtual dots, each one of those are vehicles. If you look on the right-hand side over there, you see the congestion where it's located, and then if you look at the left, you kind of see a time space location. We're just coming to the period right now in the animation where we see stopped vehicles and no data moving through that lane restriction there in a work zone. And I often joke, no data is information. So when we see those blank spots, that no data is information. Just to give you a feel for the type of data that's available, I mean, that's showing 1 hour of data in California, and then 1 hour of data in connected vehicle data in Texas, 127 million points. And we've done that, use that data to analyze every interstate across the country. If anybody sends me email, I can send you a link to that report. But as we think about our metrics, and this is a sad crash that happened in Indiana a couple years ago, captured by a dash cam. You know, one of the metrics that we worry about in connected vehicle data is very important for us is where do we have queuing on the interstate? How far does it extend? And what time of day does it appear? And that is important information from both a planning of work zones as well as identifying mitigating measures. And I'm sure every state on the webinar today has these sad stories around the state. And what we're using connected vehicle data for is hopefully design work zones so we don't have queuing, but if we do have queuing out there, what can we do to mitigate that queuing? And one of the real powerful tools that we found is combining the dash cam imagery with connected vehicle data. And I'm going to just show you an example. I showed you a heat map earlier, but this is a work zone that May 15th, May 16th, an evening work zone, and we can see it appears about 8 o'clock at night. And one of the things we want to do is not only do we want to know where it is, when it appeared, but what was the context of the installation. So one of the things that we're doing in Indiana is we're pulling dash cams. Again, we don't endorse any particular vendor. We happen to be pulling this from Vizion, but there are multiple sources of that data so that we can look and understand what were traffic conditions like. And this is going to go through, this video is going to show the truck going through the construction work zone in just a minute. You see these glaring lights, and then you'll see the material transfer unit coming up, and then you'll actually see some shoulder running. And after we look at this video, we'll then go back and we'll look at a couple of the key still images. But these are images that we can pull right there. You saw it go through in a flash. So again, we can pull day and night images, but the real value occurs when we can look and see, okay, what was going on right at that moment at where that front of that work zone shockwave was. And you can see in this particular case, these are where we have opportunity to say, okay, is this the best we could have done, or is this something down the road? Sometimes the work zones you're into, there's not much you can do when you're underway, but what should we be doing down the road to maybe make this better? And those lessons learned. I see Juan is on the call. One of the things I saw he was on the program is I went through and pulled one of his work zones from last week just to show how agile this technique can be. So this is I-70 in Illinois. We saw a moving work zone last Wednesday. So this is less than a week ago. We actually saw this on Friday. You can see right here, this is the work zone we're coming up on. And you can see the arrow board. You can actually see the activity there. So the ability to go in and look around virtually at what's going on, what was that work operation. In this particular case, it was followed by a back of queue, and you can see the arrow there pointing at the time of that work zone. The other one, I'm just going to hit on real quickly because I think we have a relatively short period of time. I'm going to talk about the eclipse. This is a bit further. I realize this isn't directly related to work zones, but I want to demonstrate the power and scalability of this connected vehicle data. And Eclipse impacted several states that are on this call. It's kind of a pretty phenomenal amount of planning went in. 304, 306, 2 minutes later, we're totally dark, and then we come out of it. What I'm showing you here on the heat map is connected vehicle data, trucks in this case, the path of totality. You can see Sunday, the inbound traffic. You can see the inbound traffic on Monday that didn't quite make it. And then you can see the outbound traffic around the center of the path. And you can actually look at some of the camera images. Some cases we had people camped out, picnic sites along the interstate. But as we get a little closer towards the path of totality where they didn't quite make it, we see people parked on the entrance ramp. Notice the time, they didn't make it into totality. And we'll go just a little bit further. If you look at the tractor trailer parked up here in the gore and that white truck, or the white car behind the truck, not ideal parking space. You can see somebody getting out. The point here is not that the eclipses only happen every once in a while. I hope what I have shown here is this diversity of images that when we pair with connected vehicle data to see we have some anomaly out there on the interstate, and then to be able to pair it with what is going on there is incredibly powerful. And the question I always get on this is, well, how frequently do these connected trucks with cameras go by? And this is an image right here of a heat map just showing you late September, early October. One of my colleagues, Rahul, prepared. This is for Indiana. It's from mile marker 0 to 150. And you can see multiple times a day we have trucks coming through, maybe less on Saturday and Sunday, where we can pull those dash cam images and add context to our work zone reports. And we do this, we can pull these for all of our partner states in the pool fund. This is some images from Pennsylvania. This is the availability you see on Pennsylvania I-81. And I pull Texas. You can pull I-10, over 870-mile stretch, maybe rural Texas, maybe not so much visibility during the day, but certainly along the locations in Houston, et cetera, you've got good connectivity. So with that, what I hope I did here was talk through some selected use cases where the work zone analytics could be looked at, comparing that trajectory data with the dash cams to provide contextualized images. And this QR code really talks about the substance of how you do that processing of that connected vehicle data. And it's got several case studies around the country. In fact, I just highlighted one, another movie. I showed Juan's moving work zone last week in Illinois, but that monograph has several examples around the country. And this happens to show some moving work zones in Texas. So I think I was asked to speak for about 20 minutes, so we would have time for Q&A. I put a couple QR codes up there, and I will pause there, and if there's any questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, I will hand the baton over to Skylar.
Sounds good. Well, I think I will get started then. Maybe Darcy, can you just confirm you can hear me? Perfect, thank you. So yeah, I'm going to give an update on a project that we've had with the FHWA that is looking at emerging data and applications for work zone safety. And so I don't know if the control's been passed. But the objective of this project was to look at different types of emerging data and then how could those be used for actual real world applications to help practitioners. So it was really use case focused of not just talking about these emerging data sets and the potential value of it, but just showing examples in 3 different states of the different uses of the data. The project wasn't specifically focused on connected vehicle data like we're talking about in this project. We took a very broad approach, initially looking at various data sets from the connected vehicle data to LiDAR. Probe data was more focused on the information that we were getting from cell phones, so things like distracted driving data, and then just other systems such as the camera analytics that Darcy was showing, or in-vehicle notifications, or smart work zone devices. But again, the core of this project was not only focusing on summarizing the emerging data and giving practitioners some kind of guidance of what those data sets are, but actually showing real world applications. I like to say that at least me, I benefit from seeing examples like Darcy was showing earlier of seeing how others are using the data, because then I can really figure out how that can apply, or maybe I modify it slightly to use in specific applications in Iowa. And you'll actually see some of my charts some of the charts that we're going to show today are really inspiration from Darcy and how he looked at the speed safety cameras, and us trying to take a similar approach for a different application in work zones. But again, the core focus was, can we develop actual things that are information that we can coordinate with the state and see how that information can be utilized as part of their work zone safety programs. For the case studies, we end up having 3 of them. So in Arizona, Virginia, and Iowa DOT, and just want to thank them, Iowa DOT, Virginia DOT, Arizona DOT, and Maricopa Association of Governments, so for being part of the case studies and really providing that feedback and access to data to support these. The vast majority of them were connected vehicle data focused. There were a couple exceptions. The historical safety risk was using the GM NRIX safety view application, where we could monitor the performance of work zone safety over time using their risk scores. And then the distracted driving in work zones was leveraging the Michelin mobility data, which allowed us to look at phone handling and where phone handling was located in the different within, approaching, through, and after the work zone setups. But the remainder of the use cases that we had for each of the states was just focused on connected vehicle data and how we could better utilize that. So with limited time, I'm just going to focus on 2 of the use cases. So the speed limit compliance work that we did for Iowa DOT, and the identifying unplanned lane closures that we completed with Arizona DOT and Maricopa Association of Governments. But I did want to take a step back and just kind of show you the magnitude of the data. This image in the background with all the pretty dots all over the map, I included in a different slide as well, but that is 1 day of data for a part of our city here in Iowa. And the beauty of the connected vehicle data is you can see almost every single roadway has some dots located along it, which gives us access to this vast data source without any additional hardware that we need to install, that we can leverage for a variety of use cases, with many of the ones, or with the ones I'm talking about today, just focusing on work zones. What that translates to is around 7 million records per hour in Iowa that we were getting as of, I think, 2023. And so it just is a massive amount of data that we're getting from them. Virginia and Arizona were a little bit more focused. For Arizona, it was across 7 or 8 work zones for around 9 months of data. We had 154 million data points that we summarized, and that was spread out across 945,000 unique journeys that drivers were traveling through the work zones across those eight work zones. And then in Virginia, it was only 4 work zones, and for 6 months of data, we had 125 million data points that we were getting those breadcrumbs from. One thing that we haven't hit on is the connected vehicle data. It also provides driver events, so things like windshield wiper activation, seatbelt buckling or unbuckling, horn activations, hard brakings, various actions that drivers are taking that we can that can be logged from the connected vehicle data. There were 33 million records of that through those same 4 work zones in those 6 months in Virginia. So we're talking about a large, vast data set that we can do a lot with, that is really that raw data that are the building blocks for these use cases and applications. So I'll get started into summarizing a couple of the uses of the data. The first one is the speed limit compliance. So it really builds well off of Darcy's presentations and Kyle and Juan's presentations earlier. In Iowa, we can't do speed cameras at this point. But we can work with law enforcement and identify areas or work zones that have speed compliance issues that we could do some targeted enforcement or aerial enforcement. And so this was attempting to look at the data to see if we can dig into it to identify areas where there are speed compliance issues. Again, the beauty of this raw data set is it's not dependent on any sort of segmentation. So typically when we do analysis that are based on fixed segments, our work zones never line up with the start and end of those segments. So our tapers are always in the middle, at the beginning or end of those segments. But with this data, we could go really high resolution down to 1/10 of a mile and look at the speed compliance as it's traveling through different parts of the work zone, or as it's traveling through the tapers or various obstacles that we are asking drivers to navigate through. So we summarize the data every 1/10 of a mile, and then the performance metrics we looked at were 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 miles per hour over the speed limit, along with the 85th percentile. And then these were the 3 work zones that we looked at in Iowa. We tried to choose a variety of different work zones that would give us some interesting insights or information that we could leverage or just show the value of the connected vehicle data. The Grinnell work zone in the top right corner here, it was simply just a 70 mile per hour work zone. We didn't reduce the speed limit at all, so it was just a kind of baseline that we could judge what sort of speed compliance were we getting whenever we didn't reduce the speed limit in the work zone. And then the other 2 work zones, the I-80, 380 work zone, along with the Iowa City work zone, were 2 work zones that were really at the edge of an urban area. And so we chose these 2 because they had a few different differences in their layouts. The most obvious one, or the biggest one that we were interested in, was those transitions from the rural parts of our state into an urban area or into our work zones, where in the Iowa City work zone, we were transitioning from 70 miles per hour down to 55 miles per hour, as opposed to on the I-80 through 80 work zone, we were transitioning from 70 down to 65, then down to 55, which is not our typical speed limit reductions as vehicles are approaching the work zones. And so this table is a little complex, so I'll go through to try to explain what we're showing. We do have the 3 work zones here, so you can see these left charts is the Grinnell work zone, and then the percentage of vehicles that were exceeding our speed limits in the 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 miles per hour. And then each of the bars are the different directions of travel. So the northbound, southbound direction, or the eastbound, westbound direction. As you can see for the Grinnell work zone, both directions are relatively the same, which is expected because we didn't change anything in the speed limit. So we have that ability to look at how many of those connected vehicles are traveling along the speed limit, and we're not seeing really any differences between the two. If we look at just the 5 mile per hour and these big red arrows that are showing here, the northbound direction for the Iowa City project and the northbound direction the northbound direction for the 8380 project were the same setup. They were going from 65 miles per hour down to 55 miles per hour. And you can see the percentage of vehicles that were exceeding the speed limit are comparable at all of the different thresholds. The one that's interesting is now whenever we compare the westbound direction for the Iowa City project, where it went from 70 down to 55 miles per hour, compared to the southbound for the 8380 project, where we went to 70, 65, and 55. For the Iowa City project, it's not what we wouldn't anticipate. We have higher speeds coming into the work zone, which then results in a higher percentage of vehicles exceeding the speed limit. And we see that at all of our different thresholds when we're comparing that to the northbound direction. But we don't see that same thing whenever we looked at the area that was going from 70, 65 down to 55. We actually see better speed compliance, even though we're starting at a higher speed limit as they're approaching the work zone, which gives us some, hopefully, baseline information that we can leverage to possibly implement this or just further explore whether us having that step down approach to the speed limits may be improving speed limit compliance as vehicles are entering the work zone. Then the added benefit, and this is a chart that I said was similar to Darcy's when he was looking at the speed cameras. Both of these are vehicles traveling from the left side of the chart to the right side of the chart, and each of these bars represent around a 1/10 of a mile segment along the roadway or through the work zone. And the value of this is we can actually see those areas where we're seeing more or less speed compliance. So when we look at that transition area for the 65 to 55 mile per hour area, we can see 88.7% of vehicles are still going 10 miles per hour or more over the speed limit. But when we compare that transition area for the southbound direction, we're only getting 75 or close to 75% of the vehicles traveling 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. If we coordinated this with a speed safety program like Kyle and Juan were talking about, this could potentially be used to identify areas where we are having higher amounts of speed non-compliance for potential targeted enforcement of areas within the work zone for reducing those speeds and improving the speed compliance. So that summarizes what we looked at with the connected vehicle data in terms of speed limit compliance. Hopefully with this, some next steps will be to moving from not just providing a summary of the speed limit compliance, but alerting Iowa DOT as well as Iowa State Patrol of potential work zones that have speed non-compliance issues, and looking at different ways of what alerts could be generated. So is it changes in speed compliance over time, or is it changes in speed compliance spatially within the work zone? But there's a lot of opportunities for us to leverage this and use this high quality and high fidelity data for monitoring the speed compliance within the work zone. And now I'll transition to our second use case, which was identifying lane closure use case. So Darcy mentioned before the breadcrumbs every 1 to 3 seconds. And the picture here is showing one of those trips from the connected vehicle data where we do get that breadcrumb every 1 to 3 seconds. And you can see them traveling along US 30 in this case, and then taking that ramp to go southbound on Interstate 35. And if you've heard me talk in other conferences, it's most likely probably been about connected aero boards. And one of the other areas of interest that I commonly present on, and really it's about really tracking where our work zones are and being able to report out to the public, or just for a DOT's own awareness of where their work zones are, and connected aero boards provide that capability. But with this use case, what we're trying to explore is, could we eliminate the need of a connected aero board, or at least reduce the dependency on the connected aero board, and be able to actually see if those the connected vehicle data can identify the vehicle traveling through. What this video is going to show is a blue line and an orange line of 2 vehicles traveling along the roadway. Here you can actually see the orange line switch from the right lane into the left lane and then continue traveling along the roadway. So exploring the data and identifying some of these things, it really kind of gave credence to the ability for us to potentially see what lanes the connected vehicle data is positioned in, and then determining whether all of a sudden we see all the vehicles in the right lane. Well, in that case, if it meets some additional criteria, we could probably safely assume that that is a work zone because there's just no lanes, no vehicles in that left lane. And how we did this was by comparing it to the center line of the roadway. So in Iowa, we used Iowa's Arnold network, which is the all linear reference roadways in Iowa, and use that as kind of a reference point. So we would calculate how far that vehicle was from the center line, and then we would also use the directionality, so whether it was to the left of the line or to the right of the line, to determine what that spatial position of the vehicle was. And with this, we could then calculate what the distribution of vehicles were for, again, that 1/10 of a mile segment of them being in the left or the right lane. And then with that, we developed a model where we leveraged the distance from the reference line and the speed and compared that to a baseline time period to determine how much differences there were. So in the CDF plot to the left, the blue and green lines, you can really see those lines are right on top of each other. So to us, that indicates there's nothing that's changing. Everything's the same. But in the chart to the right, you can actually see that orange line, which is the 21st week of the year, compared to the blue line. There's a shift to the right, which indicates there's more vehicles in that right lane compared to the time period where there was no work zone. And then the speeds, with most work zones, we expect that there will be at least some reduction in speed. Here we see a shift to the left, indicating that there are lower speeds traveling on this segment of roadway. And with this combination of the distribution changes for the lane position, as well as the speed, we can develop a model that says, okay, all these ones where we have a shift in the lane positions and the speed, we're going to call those suspected work zones. And whenever there's no real changes, the same as the baseline time period, those are going to be not suspected work zones. And so just to give an example, here's one that we explored in Arizona along Loop 101 in the northeast corner of Phoenix. So this was a work zone that was going to have a lane closure from February 5th to February 8th. If we look at February 4th, everything's blue, indicating that there was no lane closures predicted by the model. If we look at February 5th, the model also predicts that there was no lane closures, but this was due to the work zone only starting at 10 p.m. at night. So just not enough data to really support the identification of a lane closure. And then once the 6th comes around, when we actually have that lane closure for an entire day, we can start to see the models predicting locations near the end location of the work zone. But there's probably other parts of the work zone that they simply just used to cross street that didn't align exactly with where the work zone was estimated to start. And then we look at February 7th, we see similar results of the same approximate location of the lane closure. So some promising insights of the model that was developed and the ability for identifying the lane closures. And then this is just us trying to further kind of validate the results by looking at the raw, or not the raw, the hourly summary of the data, and seeing if we can see those shifts in the distribution of vehicle in the lane position as well as their speeds, and really kind of validating that the model results with hourly data that we can see from the connected vehicle data. And so, in summary of how the model performed, there's still areas for improvement. We ultimately identified a little less than half of the work zones, and we're able to compare that to a database that Arizona DOT was able to provide. There was around a quarter of the work zones that were not detected. The somewhat misleading part of this is I think everyone can agree the DOTs don't always have the best database of work zones. I work with the data in Iowa, and I know we have work zones out there that are reported, but we're not actually doing any activity. So these could be valid, not detected applications of the model, or they could just be work zones that were reported, but they didn't actually work because of rain or any other contributing aspects to the work zone. And then the other quarter were work zones that we do feel that there was a work zone based on that raw data that we were looking at, or the hourly summary data that we were looking at. And this is really where we feel the model can definitely be improved by adjusting the extents of the model or the limits of the model to more accurately capture where those lane closures are starting and stopping. And then the added benefit of this is the second table to the right is unreported events. So these are road closures that were identified by the model that didn't have an associated work zone reported by Arizona DOT. There were, I think, 79 in total that were identified. Roughly a third of them were valid impacts that we felt really confident based on the data we were seeing that they were truly a work zone lane closure and just were not reported from the ADOT system. Another around a third were invalid impacts where we really didn't see the data supporting the identification of a lane closure. And then the last third were unknown ones where we just didn't have enough confidence to say one way or the other whether it was a valid impact or not. And so just wrapping this one up, we really feel the connected vehicle data has the potential to identify lane closures. A significant limitation right now is the models that are being developed were focused on daily summaries of lane closures. And really to operationalize this, we really need to get down to hourly and minute based analysis, but that may require additional connected vehicle data to really support those levels of analysis. It has the benefit of identifying unreported lane closures that an agency may not be aware of. But again, limitations, since we're only looking at the actual traffic lanes, it's most likely not going to be able to detect traffic shifts or shoulder closures. And then there also is a need to further classify these closures as incidents due to a crash that closed the lane versus a work zone lane closure that was actually out there with workers. And so just to summarize again, these were the 9 use cases across the three case study locations. There will hopefully be a report coming out in the next couple of months. And we do plan on hosting a webinar to go into more detail for each of these use cases and summarize a good majority of those coming here in November. And so we'll be sure to share that with everyone for getting more details on this project. And with that, I'd also like to thank Jawad for being the lead on this project and the support from the FHWA for sponsoring. With that, I'll open it up for questions for both Darcy and I.
Yeah, so Darcy, come on back. And we did get one question. Are truckers aware that their dash cams are being used?
Absolutely. The data we're using is consented data. And this is definitely an evolving spaces. We're all watching some of the lawsuits play out. Consent is everything in this space. And one of the, I think the dash cam images are filtered. So I believe it's under 10 miles an hour, they drop out. So one of the challenges we do run into, obviously you want to filter out yard traffic, but when it drops under 10 miles an hour and we have some very severe work zone congestion, sometimes we lose the key images we want to get.
Yeah, wow. Okay, let's see. It looks like we have another question. Is Iowa DOT using speed data to make decisions on when and where to utilize extra LEO presence and or enforcement?
And not at this point. This was just really just a case study of how we could leverage it last year. But I know they are planning on using this more just to look at operating speeds through work zones and what sort of impacts that we're having at a higher resolution. But it's definitely a possibility for something in the future to do.
Okay, good. I'm just trying to scroll through and make sure I get all the questions here. Anybody else have any other questions in the audience? We have our two data experts here to answer them.
Well, without a question, I'll hit on another thing that I always appreciate Darcy saying is one of the huge benefits of the connected vehicle data is that there's no additional hardware that an agency needs to install. I know Darcy normally talks about that whenever he's talking about the signals, but for all these things that Darcy and I both talked about, the DOT didn't have to plan ahead to deploy sensors or collect the data. This is all just data coming from connected vehicles that we're able to leverage on the back end or in real time to monitor the performance of the work zones. So it really allows for large scale analysis, like Darcy's doing with all the interstates and what we're doing with all these different work zones across the country, with really not having to have that foresight of did we collect the right data, or are we collecting the right data before the project is even deployed. We can start to answer a lot of these questions after the fact with these data sources.
Well, I have another question. Has combining trajectories with the vision models, identifying arrow boards in models, identifying arrow boards, sorry, let me try that again. It's really hard to read these tiny little lines of text here. So has combining trajectories with vision models, identifying arrow boards in frame been considered?
Oh, you're muted, Darcy.
Okay. Darcy, I can't hear you.
You're still muted, Darcy.
We have not done any video analytics yet on the arrow board. I think I subscribe to what Skylar was advocating. It's probably easier to see the lane use change than trying to go back out and pinpoint exact location of the arrow boards, but Skylar may have another opinion on that.
I know there has been a lot of analysis in the past. There's a lot of companies out there that do have systems that can detect not only arrow boards, but traffic cones and different things like that. I think they've kind of had some mixed results. So that's where it was the idea of could we leverage the connected vehicle data where, because one of the challenges, we don't have cameras on every vehicle. We're getting a lot higher penetration rate from the connected vehicle data where we could actually detect what lanes vehicles are in, as opposed to how many commercial vehicles are traveling. And the one other thing, we always have to consider biases in the data, especially with a lot of the image-based systems. It's typically commercial vehicles because I don't necessarily want a camera on my car that's transmitting a vehicle or transmitting images. I'm sure a lot of other people don't, but commercial vehicles have that capability where, so no, it hasn't been something that we've looked at, but that's what we were trying to do with the connected vehicle data to kind of have an alternative solution to doing something like that.
Awesome. All right, here's another question. Can this data be used to trigger roadside feedback devices, such as PCMS or DMS, to inform road users?
Yeah, it definitely can. I was a co-PI on a recently completed SWSD project where we looked at leveraging connected vehicle data, probe data, or sensors for queue warning messages on DMS. We found very promising results with the connected vehicle data. We actually found that the queue warning messages were coming in ahead of when our sensors were triggering the queue warning messages, partly because connected vehicle data, we can actually look at the entire approach to a work zone as opposed to just a point detection that we're using from the sensors. So it was more of a historical look back of the data, but it showed very promising results. And so we're currently working on implementing a real-time process for some demonstration work zones here in Iowa. So yeah, more to come on that topic.
I'll just add, I strongly agree with Skylar on that. I think we think about roadside infrastructure. If you can get those sensors out of the road, I mean, the current method where you put them out a half or a mile apart, you get much better fidelity with the connected vehicle data, and you don't have to put out equipment that you got to maintain in the work zone. So it's strongly supportive of what Skylar just said.
Yeah, and it's a worker safety thing too. If we can avoid a worker having to go out and put the DMS out there, and then it's just one less person we have to have in conflict with the vehicles that are traveling by. So
Cool. All right, I think I have one last question here. What do you think is the greatest untapped opportunity in using connected vehicle data?
I feel like we're just scratching the surface of and I always tell people, like, it's really, I like to have these use cases like this because it really just provides inspiration. I'll give an example. We've been presenting this within Iowa, and one of the district engineers had reached out and said, can we identify railroad blockages to our roadways using the data? And we were able to, like, we could see vehicles approaching the railroad crossing, sitting there, stopping, waiting, and then eventually passing through whenever the train passed by, or we could see them come up, they get tired and they spin around and go take a U-turn to find an alternative route. So I think it's really just exploring the use of this raw data and trying to see how you can leverage it for various use cases. So the things that we're talking about today is just the surface level of ways we can leverage the data.
I would agree 100% with Skylar, and maybe add in beyond the trajectory stuff, your cars have so many sensors on them. So lane keep assist, when it can't see the lane markings, when your car can't see the lane markings, you probably have a hard time seeing it. That is very high on our list. Winter weather, traction control, ABS. So I think unanimous agreement here with Skylar and I. There's more untapped opportunities than we've even had a chance to scratch the surface on.
Fabulous. Okay, a couple more came in, so let's use our last 3 minutes here. Is this data available for purchase through vendors? And what's the best way to acquire a large enough database or data set for meaningful analysis?
I'll let you start, Darcy, since I've answered the last one. That's more pointed question.
There's a commercial, you can purchase this data, either passenger car or truck data or imagery. There's a number of vendors out there, Streetlight, Omnitrax, Vision. But in the spirit of we are not advocating for any one data provider. In fact, I think Skylar and I would both like to see more competition in this space. So it's just like keeping concrete and asphalt industry healthy. We want multiple healthy data providers out there. Skylar, over to you.
No, I think you covered it. So yeah, more competition. There are commercially available products that you can purchase the data. And so yeah, nothing else to add.
Okay, it's not really worded as a question, but there's awareness of some government agencies and private businesses that have cameras and audio recording occurring during operation of a vehicle. Is this? I'm not sure. I'm just reading what the question was, or the statement, I guess.
I'm not familiar with it. Maybe Skylar is.
Yeah.
No, I'm not familiar as well. It's not something we have access to or have been aware of or leveraged at this point.
Okay. Well, fabulous. I want to thank you both. This has been really a fascinating exposure to data analysis for me. And I guess we will go back to our MC, Matt Moore. Thank you.
Thank you again, Darcy and Skylar and Beth. Really appreciate this very excellent and meaningful session. We're going to take a short break, and this session will end, and you'll want to go back to that hub we saw and click on the next link for our 3 p.m. session Eastern Time, commercial motor vehicles and work zones. So looking forward to seeing you all in just about 5 minutes, and have a great day.